I need proof of citizenship before you start work today.
I've worked here 6 years. Why now?
Company policy. Employees with Spanish-sounding names.
I'm a U.S. Marine Corps veteran. 3 tours.
Bring a birth certificate or passport by tomorrow or you're suspended.
The security camera in the Human Resources office captured everything. Every discriminatory word, every illegal demand, every violation of federal employment law. And the HR manager, Patricia Donnelly, had absolutely no idea that the decorated war hero she was about to suspend without cause had fought for his country, earned a Purple Heart, lost friends in combat, and would now fight one final battle that would cost her company $5.6 million and change employment discrimination law across 3 states. The man standing in front of her desk wasn't backing down. He wasn't apologizing for his Latino heritage. He wasn't scrambling to prove he belonged in the country he bled for. He was Marine Sergeant Carlos Martinez, and he had just been handed evidence of discrimination so clear-cut that employment attorneys would later call a textbook case. What started as an illegal request for citizenship papers would spiral into a federal lawsuit, a Department of Justice investigation, a viral video with 40 million views, criminal charges for document fraud, and a corporate scandal that would expose systematic discrimination against hundreds of Latino employees across a national retail chain. Before we dive deeper into this absolutely shocking story, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Your country, your state, wherever you are. And if you believe in holding authority figures accountable when they abuse their power, hit that subscribe button. Carlos Martinez was 34 years old and had worked at Megamart, a national retail chain, for 6 years. He started as a stock clerk right after his honorable discharge from the Marine Corps and had worked his way up to assistant manager. He had excellent performance reviews. He'd won Employee of the Month 4 times. His supervisors praised his leadership skills, his work ethic, and his dedication. His military service had taught him discipline and commitment, and he brought those qualities to everything he did. That Monday morning, Carlos arrived for his shift at 7 a.m. as usual. He clocked in, checked the daily assignment board, and was heading to the stockroom when he got a call over the intercom. Carlos Martinez to HR, please. Carlos to HR. He walked to the Human Resources office, assuming it was about the promotion to store manager he'd applied for last month. Patricia Donnelly, the regional HR manager, was waiting for him with a folder on her desk. Carlos, thanks for coming in. Have a seat. Carlos sat down, still expecting good news about the promotion. Patricia opened the folder and pulled out a form. We're conducting a company-wide verification process for employment eligibility. I need you to provide proof of citizenship. Carlos looked at the form and immediately noticed it was titled Foreign National Employment Verification, a form that should only be used for employees on work visas, not U.S. citizens. Patricia, I'm a U.S. citizen, Carlos said calmly. I was born in El Paso, Texas. I've already provided all my employment eligibility documents when I was hired 6 years ago. This is a new company initiative, Patricia replied. We need updated documentation from all employees. I understand, but why am I getting a foreign national form? I'm not a foreign national. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. It's just a form we're using for verification purposes. What kind of documentation do you need? Birth certificate, passport, or naturalization papers? We need one of those 3. I showed my Social Security card and driver's license when I was hired. Those met the I-9 requirements then. They're still valid now. The company is requesting additional documentation, Patricia said, her tone becoming firmer. This is a mandatory compliance check. Carlos felt something was wrong. He'd been through enough training to know that employers can't demand specific documents beyond the I-9 form requirements. They can't request birth certificates or passports without cause. Can I ask why this verification is happening now? It's company policy. We're implementing it across all stores. Carlos asked a simple question that made Patricia's face go pale. Are you asking all employees for this documentation or just employees with Latino names? Patricia's hesitation answered the question before her words did. We're focusing on employees who may have questions about their documentation. That's not an answer, Carlos said. Are you targeting Latino employees specifically? Because that's illegal discrimination. Patricia's voice hardened. Mr. Martinez, I'm not going to argue with you. This is a direct order from corporate. You need to provide citizenship documentation by tomorrow, or you'll be suspended without pay pending verification. Carlos pulled out his phone. I'd like to document this conversation. You're demanding citizenship proof from me, a U.S. citizen and military veteran, because I have a Latino name. That's a violation of federal employment law. You can't record this conversation without my permission. Patricia snapped. Actually, in Texas, I can. This is a one-party consent state. And I want to be very clear. Are you suspending me because I'm refusing to provide documentation that you're not legally entitled to request? Patricia stood up. You're being insubordinate. Leave the premises immediately. You're suspended without pay effective now. For how long? Until you provide proper documentation proving your citizenship. As Carlos was escorted out by security, he passed 3 other Latino employees in the hallway who were all holding the same foreign national employment verification form, while white employees walked past without any paperwork. Carlos left the store, but didn't go home. He drove directly to an employment attorney's office. He'd done his research during his drive. He knew his rights had been violated, but he wanted expert confirmation before taking action. The attorney, Maria Gonzalez, listened to his story and reviewed the form Patricia had given him. Her eyes widened as she read it. This is one of the most blatant cases of discrimination I've seen in 15 years of practice, Maria said. They create a form specifically to target Latino employees. They're demanding documents they have no legal right to request. And they suspended you for refusing an illegal order. What are my options? Maria pulled up her computer. First, we file a charge with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Second, we file a federal lawsuit for discrimination and wrongful termination. Third, we notify the Department of Justice because this appears to be a pattern affecting multiple employees. How long will this take? The EEOC charge can be filed today. The lawsuit will take a few months to prepare properly. But Carlos, this would take years to resolve. Are you prepared for that? I spent 3 tours in Afghanistan. Carlos said quietly, I can handle a legal battle. While Maria was preparing the paperwork, Carlos received a text from a co-worker. They just suspended 5 more people, all Latino. Everyone's freaking out. Carlos showed Maria the text message. This is escalating quickly. They're not just targeting you. They're targeting multiple employees at once. That makes this a class action case, Maria said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. We need to contact those other employees immediately. Can you get me their names? Carlos made calls. Within 2 hours, he had connected with 8 other Megamart employees, all Latino, all suspended without pay, all demanded. All of them had worked at the company for years. All had previously provided valid I-9 documentation. All were being treated as foreign nationals despite being U.S. citizens. Maria scheduled an emergency meeting with all of them for that evening. When they gathered in her conference room, the stories were remarkably consistent. Same form, same demands, same threats of suspension. And one more disturbing detail. Several employees mentioned that Patricia had made comments about cleaning up our workforce and ensuring only legal workers remain. Those comments, Maria explained, are evidence of discriminatory intent. They show this wasn't a legitimate compliance check. It was targeted harassment based on national origin. One employee, Rosa Delgado, revealed she'd secretly recorded her conversation with Patricia, and the recording included Patricia explicitly stating, "We're focusing on Spanish surname employees first." Rosa played the recording for the group. Patricia's voice was clear. "We're focusing on Spanish surname employees first because that's where our compliance risk is highest. Corporate wants to make sure we don't have any illegals on the payroll." Maria's eyes lit up. This is smoking gun evidence. She just admitted on tape that they're targeting employees based on national origin. That's explicit discrimination. Can we use this recording in court? Rosa asked. Absolutely, Maria confirmed. Texas is a one-party consent state. Rosa, you were a party to the conversation, so you had every legal right to record it. The group authorized Maria to proceed with a class action lawsuit on behalf of all affected employees. Maria filed the EEOC charges that night. she also did something else. She contacted the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division and the Department of Homeland Security. What Megamart didn't realize was that their citizenship verification campaign was actually a federal crime. The Immigration and Nationality Act prohibits employers from discriminating based on national origin or citizenship status. Demanding specific documents based on an employee's Latino heritage was textbook discrimination. The next morning, federal investigators showed up at Megamart's corporate headquarters with a warrant to seize all employment records and internal communications about the citizenship verification program. The federal investigation moved quickly. Investigators seized emails, text messages, and internal memos from corporate executives and regional managers. What they found was worse than anyone expected. The citizenship verification program wasn't a rogue decision by Patricia Donnelly. It was a coordinated corporate initiative that started at the executive level. An internal memo from the Vice President of Human Resources laid out the plan explicitly. Target stores with high percentages of Latino employees. Implement aggressive verification procedures. Document and terminate where possible. This will reduce our labor costs and minimize compliance risks. The memo was sent to regional managers across 12 states. It affected more than 200 stores, and it had resulted in hundreds of Latino employees being harassed, suspended, or terminated. The Department of Justice filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Megamart. The charges included pattern and practice of discrimination, violation of the Immigration and Nationality Act, and retaliation against employees who questioned the policy. Meanwhile, Maria's class action lawsuit was growing. More employees came forward every day. The class eventually included 347 Latino employees who'd been targeted by the verification program. Media coverage exploded. National news outlets picked up the story. Employment discrimination against war veterans became a headline that dominated news cycles. During a press conference, Megamart CEO claimed the verification program was meant to ensure compliance with immigration law, but a reporter uncovered internal emails showing executives wanted to reduce Latino workforce percentages to improve company image in conservative markets. The CEO's press conference was a disaster. He tried to claim the verification program was about legal compliance, but reporters hammered him with questions about why only Latino employees were targeted. Why weren't employees with Irish, Italian, or Polish surnames asked for citizenship documentation? Why weren't white employees given the same forms? The CEO stumbled through non-answers until one reporter asked a question that ended the press conference. "Sir, are you aware that one of the employees you suspended is a decorated Marine Corps veteran who earned a Purple Heart serving this country?" The CEO's face went pale. "No, I wasn't aware of that specific case." "So you suspended a Purple Heart recipient without knowing his background because you assumed he might be an illegal immigrant based on his Latino name?" The CEO ended the press conference without answering. The video clip went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed over 20 million times. Public outrage was intense. Veterans groups issued statements condemning Megamart's treatment of Carlos. Latino advocacy organizations called for boycotts. Elected officials demanded investigations. 3 major advertisers pulled their contract with Megamart, citing the company's discriminatory practices, and Megamart's stock price dropped 23% in a single day, wiping out billions in market value. The financial pressure on Megamart was mounting. Stock analysts were downgrading the company. Customers were staying away from stores. The brand reputation was in free fall. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. They fired the CEO and the VP of Human Resources who'd authored the discriminatory memo. They issued a public apology to Carlos and all affected employees. But the damage was done. The lawsuits were moving forward. The federal investigation was expanding, and prosecutors were now looking at whether criminal charges should be filed against individual executives for civil rights violations. Carlos watched all of this unfold from home, where he'd been spending time with his family and processing what had happened. His phone rang constantly. Media requests for interviews, messages of support from fellow veterans, job offers from competitors who wanted to hire him on the spot. But Carlos wasn't interested in publicity or job offers. He wanted accountability. He wanted to make sure this never happened to anyone else. Maria called him with an update. Carlos, Megamart's attorneys, want to settle. They're offering reinstatement, back pay, and a cash settlement. How much? $150,000 and a confidentiality agreement. Carlos rejected the settlement immediately, not because the money wasn't enough, but because the confidentiality agreement would prevent him from speaking publicly about what happened, which would let Megamart avoid full accountability. I'm not taking a settlement that includes a gag order, Carlos told Maria. This story needs to be public. Other companies need to see what happens when you discriminate. Workers need to know their rights. Maria smiled. I was hoping you'd say that, because we can do much better than $150,000. We have 347 plaintiffs. We have recorded evidence of explicit discrimination. We have internal memos proving corporate intent. And we have a war hero as our lead plaintiff. Megamart is terrified of going to trial. They should be. The case moved toward trial. Megamart made several more settlement offers, each higher than the last. $300,000, $500,000, $750,000. Each time, Carlos said no to the confidentiality requirement. His co-workers in the class action followed his lead. They wanted accountability more than quick money. 6 months after Carlos' suspension, the trial began in federal court. The courtroom was packed with media, Latino advocacy groups, veterans organizations, and Megamart employees. Carlos testified on the first day. He described his military service, his wounds sustained in combat, his pride in serving his country. Then he described the humiliation of being treated as a foreign national in the country he bled for. During cross-examination, Megamart's attorney made a catastrophic mistake by asking Carlos if he'd ever questioned his loyalty to America, triggering an emotional response that had several jurors wiping away tears. The attorney's question hung in the air. Mr. Martinez, have you ever had occasion to question your loyalty to America? Carlos paused. The courtroom went completely silent. When I was in Afghanistan, Carlos said quietly, I watched my best friend die from an IED explosion. His name was Marcus Johnson. He was from Ohio. Before he died, he made me promise to take care of his family when I got home. I've sent money to his widow and kids every month for the past 8 years. That's my loyalty to America. It's not words. It's blood. Several jurors were crying openly. The judge called a brief recess. Megamart's attorney knew he'd just destroyed his own case. That evening, Megamart's legal team approached Maria with a new offer for $0.2 million for class action, no confidentiality agreement, public admission of wrongdoing. Is it enough? The lead attorney asked. Maria conferred with Carlos and the other plaintiffs. It's a start, Carlos said, but we want more than money. We want enforceable policy changes, mandatory anti-discrimination training for all managers, independent monitoring for 5 years, and a guarantee that no one will be retaliated against for participating in this lawsuit. Megamart agreed to everything, but during the negotiation of the settlement details, the Department of Justice announced they were filing criminal charges against 3 executives for conspiracy to violate civil rights. The criminal charges changed the entire landscape. The DOJ wasn't just seeking civil penalties. They wanted prison time for the executives who created and implemented the discriminatory policy. The 3 executives charged were the former VP of Human Resources, a regional operations director, and a senior compliance officer who'd helped design the verification forms. Each faced up to 5 years in federal prison. This sent shockwaves through corporate America. Executives could go to jail for employment discrimination? Yes, the DOJ made clear. When discrimination is systematic, intentional, and affects hundreds of people, it's not just a civil matter. It's a crime. The executives tried to negotiate plea deals, but prosecutors wanted accountability. They wanted executives to understand that discriminating against workers had serious consequences. Meanwhile, the civil settlement negotiations continued. Megamart increased their offer to $5.6 million for the class action, plus all the policy changes Carlos had demanded. They also agreed to create a $2 million fund for anti-discrimination education programs in Latino communities. Maria presented the settlement to the class members. It was the largest employment discrimination settlement in Texas history. Before the settlement could be finalized, Rosa Delgado, the employee who'd recorded Patricia, came forward with more recordings showing Patricia had threatened employees who complained, telling them they'd be reported to immigration authorities if they didn't comply. Rosa's additional recordings were devastating. They showed Patricia had explicitly threatened employees with immigration enforcement as retaliation for questioning the citizenship verification program. Even though the employees were U.S. citizens, the threat itself was illegal intimidation. These recordings added a retaliation claim to the lawsuit and increased the potential damages significantly. More importantly, they provided evidence for additional criminal charges against Patricia personally. The Department of Justice added obstruction of justice charges to Patricia's case. She wasn't just implementing a discriminatory policy. She was actively threatening witnesses and victims. Patricia's attorney tried to negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony against higher-level executives, but prosecutors weren't interested. They had enough evidence without her cooperation. The criminal trials of the three executives began 9 months after Carlos's initial suspension. The evidence was overwhelming. The discriminatory memo, internal emails discussing plan, testimony from dozens of victims, statistical analysis showing the policy targeted Latino employees with mathematical precision. The first executive to go to trial was the former VP of Human Resources, James Bradford. His defense was that he was following orders from the CEO. The prosecution produced emails showing Bradford had actually initiated the citizenship verification program himself, presenting it to the CEO as a way to address demographic concerns in our workforce. Bradford's defense collapsed. The jury convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, the first corporate executive in Texas history to receive prison time for employment discrimination. The other 2 executives quickly took plea deals. 2 years each in federal prison, permanent prohibition from holding corporate leadership positions, and cooperation with ongoing investigations into discrimination at other companies. Patricia Donnelly was convicted separately. She received 18 months in federal prison for civil rights violations and obstruction of justice. At her sentencing, the judge noted that she'd used her position to intimidate vulnerable workers, which warranted a harsher sentence than she might otherwise have received. The civil settlement was finalized, $5.6 million divided among 347 class members. Carlos received the largest individual award, for $187,000, reflected his role as a lead plaintiff and the particularly egregious nature of his treatment as a war veteran. But Carlos didn't keep most of the money. He donated $300,000 to veterans organizations and immigrant rights groups. He used another $100,000 to create a scholarship fund for children of Latino military veterans. Megamart's board of directors, facing continuing pressure from shareholders and customers, made an unprecedented decision to hire Carlos as their new vice president of diversity and inclusion at a salary of $250,000 per year. Carlos was skeptical about the job offer. The company that had discriminated against him now wanted him to lead their diversity efforts. It felt like corporate PR damage control. But after meeting with the new CEO and board members, Carlos realized they were serious about change. They gave him full authority to overhaul hiring practices, implement real anti-discrimination training, and fire any manager who showed bias. Most importantly, they gave him direct reporting authority to the board of directors, bypassing the HR department entirely. Carlos accepted the position with one condition. Everything he did would be public and transparent. No hiding problems. No covering up discrimination. If he found issues, he'd address them publicly and immediately. The board agreed. Carlos's first action was to personally contact every employee who'd been targeted by the citizenship verification program. He apologized on behalf of the company. He ensured they were all offered reinstatement if they wanted it. He gave them all access to the settlement fund and additional compensation. His second action was to fire 12 managers who had implemented the discriminatory policy enthusiastically or who had retaliated against employees who complained. One of the managers Carlos fired was his former direct supervisor, who had written his excellent performance reviews but had privately supported the citizenship verification program. revealing that even people who seemed supportive could harbor discriminatory beliefs. The firing of his former supervisor was difficult, but necessary. Carlos had respected this person, worked alongside him for years, and received praise and promotions from him. But the evidence showed the supervisor had actively participated in implementing the discriminatory policy. He'd identified Latino employees for verification. He'd pressured them to provide documents. He'd reported those who refused to HR for discipline. Personal relationships couldn't protect someone who participated in discrimination. Carlos learned an important lesson. Bias often hide behind smiles and professional courtesy. Carlos's third major action was to create an employee hotline where workers could report discrimination anonymously without fear of retaliation. The hotline was managed by an independent third party, not Megamart HR. In the first month, the hotline received 87 calls. Some reported current discrimination. Others reported past incidents that had never been addressed. Each complaint was investigated thoroughly. 12 more managers were terminated or disciplined. The message was clear. The old Megamart was gone. The new Megamart had zero tolerance for discrimination. The hotline revealed that the citizenship verification program hadn't just targeted Latino employees. It was part of a broader pattern of discrimination that also affected Muslim employees, who were being subjected to additional security screenings based on their religion. Carlos expanded the investigation into religious discrimination. What he found was another systematic pattern. Muslim employees, particularly those who wore hijabs or had Middle Eastern names, were being subjected to enhanced background checks that weren't applied to other employees. They were being denied promotions to customer-facing positions. They were being scheduled for fewer hours than non-Muslim co-workers. This was a separate violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Carlos didn't hesitate. He immediately reported the findings to the Department of Justice and the EEOC. He also contacted the affected employees and offered them the same remedies that had been provided to Latino employees: back pay, apologies, and paths to promotion. The Muslim employees filed their own class action lawsuit. Megamart settled quickly this time. $3.2 million and comprehensive policy changes. The company couldn't afford another public trial. Carlos's aggressive approach to rooting out discrimination was controversial. Some executives worried he was moving too fast and creating liability, but the board backed him completely. Stock prices were recovering. Customer sentiment was improving, and the company was actually attracting better talent because word spread that Megamart was serious about inclusion. 1 year after Carlos took the VP position, Megamart received an award from a major Latino business organization for becoming an exemplary employer, and Carlos was asked to give the keynote speech at their national conference. Carlos's keynote speech was powerful and personal. He talked about his journey from being suspended for his Latino name to becoming the VP, leading the company's transformation. But he didn't sugarcoat the reality. This was a story about a company that got it right. Carlos told the audience, "This is a story about a company that got it catastrophically wrong, faced consequences, and then chose to actually change. The difference between Megamart and other companies isn't that we never discriminated. It's that we face accountability and respond with genuine reform instead of just PR." He challenged other companies to examine their own practices. How many of you have policies that disproportionately affect Latino, Muslim, or other minority employees? He asked, how many of you have managers who make assumptions based on names or appearances? How many of you would rather settle lawsuits quietly than address the underlying problems? The speech generated standing ovations and uncomfortable silences in equal measure. Carlos didn't care about making people comfortable. He cared about making them change. Back at Megamart, the transformation continued. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in how Latino and Muslim employees felt about workplace inclusion. 3 years after the lawsuit, the Department of Justice closed its monitoring of Megamart, concluding the company had made exemplary progress in addressing discrimination, and several other major retailers asked Carlos to consult with them on implementing similar reforms. 5 years after Patricia Donnelly suspended him for refusing to prove his citizenship, Carlos Martinez sat in his office at Megamart's corporate headquarters. On his wall hung his Purple Heart citation, Next, a photo of him in a Marine Corps dress uniform. Next to that was a framed copy of the settlement agreement that had changed hundreds of lives. And next to that was a letter from the Secretary of Labor commending Megamart's transformation under Carlos's leadership. The company that had discriminated against him had become one of the most diverse and inclusive major retailers in America. Latino employees were being hired, promoted, and celebrated. Muslim employees were thriving. The workforce reflected the diversity of the communities Megamart served. But Carlos knew the work was never finished. Discrimination doesn't disappear because you fire a few executives and settle a lawsuit. It requires constant vigilance, ongoing education, and willingness to confront bias wherever it appears. Carlos still personally reviewed every discrimination complaint that came through the hotline. He still visited stores to talk with employees about their experiences. He still told his story to new managers, showing them the video of his suspension and explaining what went wrong and how it would never happen again. Megamart's transformation wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it started with one Marine veteran who refused to prove his citizenship in the country he bled for. One man who stood up for his rights. One lawsuit that changed a corporation. One victory that showed discrimination has consequences. Thanks for watching this story all the way through. If this showed you that standing up against discrimination can lead to real change, share it with someone who needs to see it. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. We're committed to bringing you stories that prove justice is possible when people refuse to accept injustice and when the system actually works to hold discriminators accountable. Drop a comment and let us know, what was the most powerful moment in this story for you? Have you ever experienced workplace discrimination? Do you think companies can genuinely change, or is it always just PR? Your voice matters in this conversation. See you in the next one.